All right, so get this. 2024 at the box office, it was a wild ride. We're diving into this Forbes article that you sent me, the one listing the top 10 highest grossing movies. 9 out of 10 sequels. You read that right. Only one original film made it into the top 10.
So is this like this sequel apocalypse that some critics are predicting? Let's find out.
Yeah, what's interesting is that while some might see this as a lack of originality, it could also be a sign of audiences craving familiarity after a few years of, well, everything.
Right, comfort movies, maybe? I mean, leading the pack with a whopping $1.698 billion worldwide. Inside Out 2, clearly folks were ready to revisit those emotions.
What do you think it was about Inside Out that really resonated with people, leading to such a successful sequel?
You know, the original Inside Out really tapped into something universal. It wasn't just a kid's film. It was about the complexities of growing up and processing emotions
Yeah.
and connecting with family. Those themes are timeless. And the sequel just cleverly built upon that foundation. It wasn't just rehashing the same jokes. It deepened our understanding of those characters and their inner worlds.
And Inside Out 2 wasn't the only sequel raking it in. Deadpool and Wolverine slashed their way to $1.338 billion. Proof that R-rated superhero flicks still have a massive audience. Then you've got Despicable Me 4 still going strong with a global gross of $969.1 million. It seems like Minions never go out of style.
It's fascinating how Despicable Me has managed to stay relevant over the years. The animation style is very appealing, the humor works for both kids and adults, and they've cleverly introduced new characters and storylines to keep things fresh. It's not just relying on Gru and the Minions, they're constantly expanding that universe.
Okay, so sequels dominated, but was there anything original in the top 10?
There was one,
Yeah.
Wicked, the prequel to The Wizard of Oz, brought in a respectable $634.3 million. It's interesting because even though it's technically a prequel, it still offered a new perspective on a familiar story.
So maybe it's not just about sequels versus originals, but about offering something new even within an established world. Wicked is like the exception that proves the rule right.
Exactly. Wicked demonstrated that audiences are hungry for fresh takes, even on beloved classics. It wasn't just rehashing the same plot points, it was exploring the backstory of these iconic characters in a way that felt both familiar and surprising. And let's not forget the stage production's enduring popularity, which definitely laid the groundwork for the film's success.
Speaking of building on familiar ground, Dune, Part 2 continued that epic saga bringing in $714.4 million. Denis Villeneuve is definitely carving out his own space in the sci-fi landscape.
Yeah, Dune is a great example of a director with a strong vision attracting a dedicated fan base. It's dense, it's visually stunning, and it requires an investment from the audience. The success of Part 2 shows that there's definitely an appetite for complex and challenging sci-fi.
And on a slightly more monster-sized scale, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, stomped its way to $571.7 million. Clearly, the MonsterVerse still has some roar left in it.
What's interesting about Godzilla x Kong is that it's part of a cinematic universe that was carefully planned and built over several films. It's not just throwing monsters together for a quick cash grab. They're building a mythology, expanding the lore, and giving these iconic creatures a new lease on life. It's a smart strategy, and clearly audiences are buying into it.
Okay, so we've got epic sci-fi giant monsters and now everyone's favorite panda. Kung Fu Panda 4 kicked its way to a very respectable $547.6 million worldwide. You think Poe's got another sequel in him?
Kung Fu Panda has managed to strike a balance between action humor and heartwarming storytelling. It's a formula that works across cultures and generations. Plus, who doesn't love a good panda? I think as long as they keep the story fresh and the animation stunning, there's definitely potential for more adventures.
Now, this next one was a long time coming. Beetlejuice, the sequel to Tim Burton's 1988 classic, conjured up $451.1 million. Talk about tapping into that nostalgia vein.
The original Beetlejuice was a cultural phenomenon. It had a very unique visual style, a darkly comedic tone, and Michael Keaton's performance was iconic. The sequel had a lot to live up to, but it managed to capture some of that magic, while also introducing new elements to keep it from feeling like a rehash.
And last but not least, Venom, The Last Dance, swung into theaters, bringing in $476.3 million worldwide. This was the finale of Tom Hardy's trilogy. And it seems like audiences were ready to say goodbye to the symbiote-suited anti-hero.
The Venom films have always been a bit of an outlier in the superhero genre. They're darker, more violent. And they delve into the psychological complexities of the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom. The Last Dance offered a satisfying conclusion to their story, wrapping up those loose ends and giving fans a sense of closure. So we've seen which films brought in the big bucks in 2024, but where can you actually watch these box office behemoths? The streaming landscape is a jungle out there, with each studio staking its claim.
You're telling me. It seems like every week there's a new streaming service launching. Let's break down where these top 10 films have landed. First up, Inside Out 2. That emotional roller coaster is now streaming on Disney Plus, Gare, right alongside the original and a whole library of Pixar goodness.
Yeah, Disney Plus is really becoming the go-to for family-friendly entertainment. They've got Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and a ton of classic Disney films. It's a smart strategy,
Yeah.
capturing that whole family audience. And speaking of Marvel, Deadpool and Wolverine also found a home on Disney Plus Care, which might surprise some folks considering the R rating.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like Disney Plus is willing to push those boundaries a bit, especially since they have the Hulu platform for more mature content. It'll be interesting to see how they balance those different demographics going forward.
Now, if you're looking for epic sci-fi adventures, Dune, Part 2, landed on Max along with the first installment. They've got that whole Warner Bros. Catalog plus HBO originals, so they're definitely a contender in the streaming wars.
And Max is also the place to be for another dose of Tim Burton's quirky style, with Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. That makes sense considering that the first Beetlejuice is already a popular pick on the platform.
It's interesting how streaming platforms are using these classic films as anchors to attract subscribers. They know people are nostalgic for those familiar favorites, and then they surround them with newer content. It's a clever way to bridge those generational gaps.
Now let's talk animation. Despicable Me 4 with those ever-popular minions landed on Peacock. That seems like a good fit for their family-oriented offerings.
Peacock has been trying to carve out its niche in the streaming market, and family entertainment is a smart bet. They've got a mix of classic and newer animated films, plus some live-action family comedies. It'll be interesting to see if they can compete with the likes of Disney Plus and Netflix in that arena.
Meanwhile, Poe and the Furious 5 landed on Netflix. With Kung Fu Panda 4, Netflix is the OG of streaming. But they've been facing some stiff competition lately.
Netflix has a huge subscriber base, but they've also lost some ground to these newer studio-backed platforms. They're still investing heavily in original content, but they're also licensing popular films like Kung Fu Panda 4 to keep subscribers engaged. It's a balancing act, trying to keep those costs under control while also offering a diverse library.
Speaking of balancing acts, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, is actually streaming on both Max and Netflix. That's a pretty unusual strategy, isn't it?
It is unusual, and it might be a sign of things to come. As these streaming wars heat up, we might see more studios experimenting with different distribution models. They're trying to reach the widest possible audience, and sometimes that means making deals with multiple platforms.
So not all of our top 10 films are available for streaming just yet. Moana 2 is still making waves exclusively in theaters.
Yeah, Moana 2 is a prime example of Disney's strategy of prioritizing theatrical releases for their biggest animated films. They know those films have the potential to be global box office hits, and they want to capitalize on that before making them available on Disney Plus.
And Wicked, the prequel to The Wizard of Oz, is currently available on demand through various digital platforms.
Releasing a film on demand allows studios to reach audiences who might not make it to theaters. It's also a way to generate revenue from those who prefer to watch films in the comfort of their own homes.
And finally, Venom. The Last Dance is also available on demand, wrapping up Tom Hardy's trilogy.
The on-demand market is becoming increasingly competitive with so many platforms vying for attention. Studios are having to get creative with their marketing and release strategies to stand out from the crowd. But at the end of the day, it's about giving consumers choices. And a lot of people appreciate the option to watch films on their own terms, whether it's in theaters, on a streaming platform, or on demand.
Okay, so we've covered the top 10 highest-grossing films of 2024. And we've navigated that wild world of streaming platforms. But what does it all mean for you, the movie enthusiast?
Well, this list gives us a snapshot of audience preferences, studio strategies, and that evolving relationship between theatrical releases and streaming. We see a clear trend towards established franchises, but also a glimmer of hope for original stories.
Yeah, it's like that age-old debate. Do we crave comfort and familiarity, or are we hungry for something new and groundbreaking? Maybe it's a bit of both.
Exactly. And I think the success of Wicked, even though it's a prequel, shows that audiences are open to fresh perspectives, even within familiar worlds.
Yeah, it's like they want the best of both worlds, the comfort of a known quantity with the excitement of a new adventure.
Precisely. And the streaming landscape further complicates things. Studios are having to make tough decisions about where and how to release their films.
Right. Do they prioritize a big Theatrical release, or do they go straight to streaming? It's a gamble either way.
It is a gamble, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. They have to consider the genre, the target audience, the budget, and a whole host of other factors.
And then there's the question of how streaming is shaping the types of films being made. Are we going to see more big-budget spectacles designed for the big screen? Or will we see a rise in smaller, more intimate stories that work well on a streaming platform?
That's a question that's been on everyone's mind in Hollywood, and I don't think there's a simple answer. I think we'll continue to see a mix of both.
So where does that leave us, the movie lovers?
I think it's a great time to be a movie fan. We have more choices than ever before. We can watch films in theaters, on streaming platforms on demand. We have access to a vast library of classic and contemporary films.
And we're seeing some really interesting experimentation with storytelling, visual effects, and even the way films are released.
Exactly. It's an exciting time to be a part of this ever-evolving world of cinema.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the 2024 box office.
It's been a pleasure dissecting these trends with you.
The feeling is mutual. Now, before we sign off, I have one final question for you, dear listener. Out of these top 10 films, which ones did YU actually see in 2024? And which ones are now on your must-watch list? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, happy watching.